This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work with another response to an Ask Prof Wolff question from our Patreon community. This one comes from Adit M. Shah, and I want to answer it because it's about Baetjer, basic Marxian theory, and questions and criticisms of it, and then a bit more about where it leads. So let me begin with a brief summary of the Marxian argument and then turn to the questions and criticisms. The Marxian argument goes like this. Whenever a person goes looking for a job in the private sector, talking to an employer, the conversation goes something like this in basic economic terms. The employer explains to the prospective employee, here's the work we want you to do, here's how the work will be done, where the work will be done, and so on. And they go over all of that, and then they get to the question of payment. And the employer says, I'm of course going to pay you a wage. How about $20 an hour? And the employee, let's assume for simplicity, agrees, $20 an hour. Both the employer and the employee know something, even if they can't put it into words. That was Marx's contribution, among others, namely, putting what I'm about to say into words. Here we go. The $20 that the employer pays the worker will result in that worker coming to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, etc. During that time, the worker's brains and muscles will be busy doing what the employer told him to do. And at the end of the day, the week, the month, the employer will either have more quality or more quantity because of this worker's effort than he would have had if he didn't hire the worker. So he's paid the worker 20, that's an outlay by the employer, but what he gets back is the extra output in quality or quantity that the worker he hired helped to produce. That extra, due to the work of that worker, has to be worth more than $20 when the employer sells it. Why? Because otherwise there's nothing in it for the employer. If the worker's labor produces $20 more worth of output, which the employer gets when he sells it, and then he has to use it to pay the worker for the wage, there's nothing left for the employer. Conclusion. The profits of employers are the difference between the value added by the worker's labor and what is paid to that worker for adding that value by his or her brains and muscle being used as the employer directs. What does Dr. Howard Baetjer and what do a host of others complain about this? They don't like this argument. Let's be really clear why they don't. Because it locates the cause, the origin, the source of profit in a kind of a ripping off of the working class. That's right. Workers produce more value than they get paid in value. $22 is what the employer might get for selling what the worker did, added by his labor every hour, but he only paid him $20. The net difference there, $2 per hour per worker, is what the employer's profit is all about. This notion that the employer is grabbing something that the workers produced is what makes people not like this theory, which is why they don't like Marxist theory to be taught anywhere, ever. They don't always succeed in repressing it, but as a professor of economics in the United States, all of my life, they have been wildly successful in the vast majority of economics departments in the United States who never teach this theory at all. So now let's look at the objection. Howard Baetjer, like many others, now shows that he really hasn't studied economics too terribly well. Everything I just said about the Marxian theory, the worker being ripped off, makes it clear that we're talking about the same thing. The value in dollars paid to the worker and the value in dollars of what the employer sells. We're comparing two things that are different in quantity, but they are the same quality. In all basic economics, stemming from Adam Smith and David Ricardo, not just from Karl Marx, a distinction is made between a value that we all look at in the same way, an objective value they called it, dollars, money, cash, and subjective value. What a tomato means to you is different from what it means to me. The value I get from eating a tomato is different from the value you get from eating a tomato, which is different from other people's attitudes towards tomato. And the distinction Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Marx all made was the distinction between use value, what you get when you use something, and exchange value, what you exchange it for in the market, or in simple English, how much it's worth. Marxian theory is developed in terms of exchange value, and Howard Baetjer doesn't get that. So he wants to compare what the $20 wage means to the wage earner with what else he or she could have been doing in that same time, how useful it might have been. That's confusing exchange value and use value. And before you write articles like the one that Adit M. Shah brought to my attention, in which you claim to be debunking Marx's theory, you ought to learn just enough of the basic economics to have some idea of what is going on. Your criticism reveals a lack of familiarity with something so basic to all economics, Marxian and other kinds as well, this difference between use value and exchange value that's a little embarrassing to encounter. Okay, now there's a second part of Adit M. Shah's question I want to deal with. He points out that the capitalist has a theory, or Mr. Howard Baetjer perhaps has a theory, that what the capitalist's profit is a payment for is the risk he takes of putting together workers, machines, some notion of how the market works, and putting all those things together to produce a product. Because there's a risk there. You have to kind of know what you're doing, and you're taking a risk because you might produce in the wrong way, you might produce something for which nobody wants to pay money, etc., etc. And the reward, the profit to the entrepreneur, the capitalist, is that he takes the risk, because it might not work. He might spend all that money, produce a good, and nobody buys it, and the money is lost. I love this argument, because it's blind. Why is it blind? The capitalist is not the only one who takes a risk. Suppose the capitalist has 10,000 employees. Those 10,000 employees are coming from a variety of places to work in the factory of this man, or the office or the store, who is the employer, or the woman, it doesn't matter. They're putting their kids in the local schools. They're moving their families. They're buying a home. They are taking enormous risks to work with and for that employer. He's not the only one taking a risk. If his idea doesn't work, all he's lost is the money he put in. You know what they've lost? The money invested in that house. Because if there's no job, they won't be able to make their mortgage payments. They risk losing their house, which risks depressing the value of properties in the neighborhood. They yank their kids out of the local school because the parents don't have a job anymore. You get the picture? The risk being taken is by everyone. The employer has a very limited risk, whatever money he puts in. If he's rich, as most capitalists are, he won't be stupid. He won't put all his eggs in this basket. He will be taking a manageable, limited risk, whereas the risks taken by his employees are in many cases life-changing risks. So if profit is going to be thought of as some sort of reward to risk, well, then it would have to be shared by all the people in some way that reflected how big a risk they were taking. Thinking of the capitalist as the only one that takes a risk is an arrogant, incorrect, non-serious proposition. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work, thanking our Patreon community for its ongoing support.